Hi, I'm Larry Castle here with Ken Brown for episode 65 of That's a Good Question. What about the Arizona Audit, Ravi Zacharias Ministries, and media ministries in general? Welcome back to this episode of That's a Good Question. And today, again, we're going to be fielding a question from a viewer. And it will be about the tragic ending of Ravi Zacharias' apologetics ministry and how should we view that as Christians. And related to that, to viewer-submitted questions, I should say, if you'd like to give us a question to consider, you can send those in to us at info@cbctrenton.com, and we'll get those, curate them, and as we have opportunity, we'll try to provide answers for those. And as I mentioned in the intro as well, in today's title, you heard me talk about some news items. We've got some breaking news, if you will, about the Arizona presidential election audit. And I'm sure most of our listeners have heard about that. And since we've talked about the election in the past and the unsubstantiated claims that have been made regarding fraud, we thought this would be a good wrap up to that issue. So before we talk about the Ravi Zacharias situation, we'll say some things about the Arizona audit. And however, as we do each time we talk about political issues and things like that, we want to just explain to our listeners, why would two pastors be bothering to take time to talk about these issues? And in the case of the election claims, and really most of the claims that have been made in the last year and a half about these kinds of issues going on in our country, a key issue for us as Christians is our credibility.
Right.
And I said earlier, and we've said in the past, that these election fraud claims are unsubstantiated. They haven't been backed up with proof. So when Christians offer these and publicize these as if they are true, it can really hurt our credibility. And that's something that God cares deeply about. And that's why he gave rules for making claims, as you've pointed out. He gave rules in Scripture about when we make claims. So you have to substantiate your claims by 2 or 3 witnesses, for example.
Exactly, because God is interested in proof, not merely evidence, before we make truth claims. Now, when I juxtapose proof and evidence, many people are thinking, aren't those the same thing? Because most of us use those terms interchangeably. But they're not. They're not the same. Just as facts and proof are not the same thing either. Evidence and facts are pieces of information. But those are pieces of information that have to be put together into a claim. So what does that fact or that piece of evidence represent? So it's not enough to say, hey, look, there are people wheeling cases out of election headquarters in Detroit on election night, or to say, hey, there's a truck that's arrived late into the night, boxes are being unloaded, or they're on camera, you have election workers in Georgia pulling stuff out from under tables after the polls have closed, or, hey, look, they're in Antrim County in Michigan. Biden got more votes than he could have possibly received in this heavily Republican county. And by the way, they use Dominion voting machines. And there are all kinds of questions about them. And look, and on.
String together a lot of things that may or may not be connected. And
Yes.
say there's evidence.
Evidence. Look, there's this phenomenon going on. So with each of those statements, what you have are pieces of evidence. You have facts, you have artifacts, you have discrete items of information that add up to what?
Something.
Well, yeah, but what?
What?
Yeah, they don't add up to anything until you put them together. Until you put them together in a way that proves a claim. That's why we speak of the burden of proof. We don't speak of the burden of evidence. We don't speak of the burden of facts, because any person can literally point to anything and say, look at that, or look at this. Courts are great places, from a human standpoint, really the best places to prove claims. And as we said in the past, the election claims have lost in court every single time because the evidence does not constitute proof. We're not saying there's no evidence. There's evidence of all kinds of things. It's what does it amount to? Everything is evidence of something. The question is, what does it prove?
Yeah. I've done a lot of thinking about this. the difference between facts and proof. As for years I worked with our teenagers
Right.
here at the church, and as I talk with students about things like apologetics, particularly as we talk about things like what they learn in school about origins and that subject, you'll hear the scientific community point to various pieces of evidence
Right.
and draw conclusions about this proves this or that about our origins, about evolution.
Yeah.
But, we take the kids down and visit the Creation Museum, and they make a big deal out of the fact that evidence must be interpreted. And so that's what we've taught our kids. Evidence has to be interpreted because, like you said, everything is evidence of something, but of what?
Yes.
That remains to be seen as you interpret that.
Right.
And that interpretive process goes through the lens of your assumptions. These are all things for 2 decades we've taught, we believe, and probably anybody listening to us, whether they agree or disagree on the political subjects we've raised, would agree with that when it comes to origins.
Yeah.
The facts, we view the evidence, the facts, and if we start with the lens of naturalism, we're going to draw conclusions about these things that say we have common ancestors and such. But if we start with the lens of a biblical anthropology, and there's no compulsion then to say, things only can happen through natural processes. If you can have God acting in the process, then you're allowed to consider different.
And that's looking at the same facts.
Same exact pieces of evidence.
Right.
And depending on what your presuppositions are, you may have different theories that you are allowed to entertain about.
So it's as you say, our church has existed for 2 decades. For 2 decades, we've been preaching this and teaching this. And yet, when it comes to another realm, most of our viewers, as you say, would agree with that. But then when you apply it to the political realm, suddenly it's just, hey, look, there's a bunch of stuff going on. And we need to remember that with that stuff, that evidence, those facts, we have to do the exact same thing. We have to pull it together and we have to say, what does it mean? And we can't make a claim for what it means until we've done that work to actually prove it. That's why Van Til,
rather than bringing a set of presuppositions to it and kind of infusing what it might mean, like, I'm a Republican, and the folks that I'm listening to on
Bring
the
my
news
bias
are
to it.
saying, bring my bias to it.
Yep.
We're trying to, as best we can, look at the evidence objectively.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's why Van Til, who is near and dear to our heart because he was an apologist, he taught some of what we're talking about here, that there is no such thing as a brute fact. That was the term he used to use. There's no such thing as a brute fact, just a fact that stands on its own. That fact, like every event, has to be interpreted. If we're going to make truth claims, then we need to interpret, and we have to piece together all of that in a way that proves what it is we've claimed. And if what we claim, and perhaps we've just speculated about, maybe we didn't claim it, maybe we at least had enough humility to say, I don't know what's going on here, but this looks really weird to me. But either way, once it's disproven, we should be the first to correct the record and accept the truth. That enhances our credibility when we do that.
Absolutely. And especially, on an event like this where we stand a lot to gain if that's true. The conservative side of an election would gain
We might want it to be
power.
true.
Yeah, you might want it to be true. And then when you acknowledge that it's not true, your credibility is bolstered.
Indeed.
When you acknowledge what is the apparent truth because the facts led, the evidence showed proof. So in the news in the last day, we've found that there's this much anticipated Arizona audit has concluded in its draft report that the numbers from the state the week of the election, going back nearly 11 months now, were accurate, right? And actually, out of the millions of votes, the audit found that Biden actually had, was it 300 more?
360, I think.
Yeah. So,
right. So the question then is that going to put an end to these claims? Certainly in Arizona.
This isn't the first of these recounts and
Michigan,
investigations, right?
our very own state.
Yeah.
Our very own state did, an audit and went through it again. And not only that, the Republican legislature did their own investigation and put out a 65-page report that piece by piece, one at a time, took apart every false claim that was made about the Michigan election. So this is going to put an end to it. Certainly in Arizona, right? Mm-hmm. We can predict that some people are still going to make claims about the audit. That would be my prophecy. Mm-hmm. They'll say that now there was something wrong with the audit. It was inadequate. Well, you did have people conducting this audit who were clearly incompetent, but they were people, honestly, they really were. I mean, they were hired by the Republican state legislature in Arizona. It's a group called Cyber Ninjas. I'm concerned already. And they're motivated to find fraud, but they still couldn't pull it off. I mean, that was their objective. They were making these claims and they couldn't do it. So is this going to end it? No, it's not going to end it for the true believers.
I feel compelled to. I know this should go without saying. I didn't watch you vote, but I'm guessing you didn't vote for Biden.
This is true.
I didn't vote for Biden. We're not talking about this because we're just really elated that Biden won the election.
Oh, right. No, right. Absolutely. We're not. No. That's right. No. That's it. Thank you for injecting that. No, we just want our people, our side, to stop making false claims,
right,
as if they are true. That's really what we want. And that's why I'm belaboring this question. Is it going to end? It's not going to end for the true believers. They're only going to be willing to accept what fits with their desired narrative. It will not end for them, but what I want to really drive home here is, friends, it needs to end for us. Mm-hmm. And I have at least hope for that it can end for us. I like the word you used at the beginning, that this is a fitting coda. I think you may have said.
Wrap up.
Okay, a coda. No, you should have said coda.
I don't have my master's degree yet like you do, so I can't use that big of a word.
All right, fine. A coda, an ending, a finale to this whole thing, because we Christians care about substantiating our claims. So this should be finally the end of the speculation that's masquerading as truth. That's my hope. That's my sincere desire, that we pack it in on the conspiracies. Mm-hmm. That we, friends, I'm making a plea here, that we regroup, that we reassess what we've been believing and perhaps even saying. Especially, let's reassess who it is we've been listening to.
Yeah.
The people who told you the election was stolen misled you. Mm-hmm. So mark them. Who told you that? And take them off your reading and listening list. You had, on social media, I remember you had guys telling you how obvious it was that Arizona was won by Trump, and he won easily. And if you can't see that, you're willfully blind. Mm-hmm. I would encourage folks who witnessed that to see what people like that in general, who made those kinds of confident claims, what are they going to do now, especially those who are Christians? Mm-hmm. Are we going to say and bolster our credibility and say, you know what, I was wrong? Mm-hmm. That would be a beautiful thing.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So here's where we are after several years now of disinformation that we've been fed. The things that we've been told are true have been lies, proven lies. That the election in Michigan was stolen has been disproven. Mm-hmm. Now in Arizona, for example. So the things that you were told were true have turned out to be lies, and the things that you were told were lies are in fact true. Mm-hmm. So I'll just go back a ways to the whole Mueller investigation that I've mentioned before, and if you're somebody who thinks you know the deal with that, then I assume you've read the Mueller report, and if you haven't, let me encourage you probably for the 5th time to do that. And as a result, this is what's happened. It's corrupted faith in our elections. Mm-hmm. And our courts have been misused by people that we've mentioned a few times, the Kraken lawyers, release the Kraken people. Rudy Giuliani has had his law license suspended. So the courts have been misused. And this has all been led by people who can, and I say this in a considered way, but I'm going to use this term. This has all been led. This group of lawyers can only be described as clowns at this point. I mean, really, and I say that advisedly. I mean, Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and the My Pillow guy, he's not an attorney, but he's making these claims. Here's a guy who's standing outside of the White House on January the 15th, just 5 days before Inauguration Day. He's standing waiting to be let in. He's got papers in his hand about what he's going to talk to in a camera trains in on those. You can Google that. My Pillow, Mike Lindell, notes, martial law, and you see he's got written on his notes what he wants to talk about. One of those things is encouraging the president. He's lost the election. 5 days before we're supposed to have a peaceful transfer of power to implement martial law in the country. You've got an attorney, a guy named John Eastman, just this past week, a memo that he wrote to the president, to the administration, 6-point memo just came out this week with his plan for how the election results can be overturned in Congress. And he's got 6 points. Here's exactly how you could do it. And guess what is involved by name in one of those points? Arizona, interestingly. And so he's got it. You'll go alphabetically by state. You'll go to Alabama. But then when you get to Arizona, Pence, here's what you need to do. This is what this attorney is proposing. And Pence, you need to say the results in Arizona are disputed. We've got another slate of electors, so we're going to set that aside. This guy had a whole elaborate plan that the bottom line would have been that there would not have been a sufficient number of electors to elect Biden or Trump. And guess who would have had to have voted? It would have been the House of Representatives, which would have given it to Trump. He had a whole plan to overturn the election.
So, and these are the folks who are really concerned about a fair election.
Right?
Yeah.
This is a plan. This is a written plan, and this is the reason that Mike Pence was a key player then. Now the pressure is being put on Pence, and Pence is looking at this thing, and he's never heard of it. He goes to Dan Quayle. They're both Indianans from Indiana. Both had been vice presidents. And he goes to Dan Quayle to get his advice. Quayle says, you cannot do this. You have no authority to do this. But he went to other people. He looked into it. The day before the January 6th insurrection, which was the day that Pence and Congress were to certify the election, the day before on January 5th, Pence said, I've looked into this. I have no authority to do this. I'm simply going to count the votes when the electoral votes. Well, that's when Trump then is giving his speech, and he's saying Mike Pence was too weak and all of this. And we all remember what happened on January 6th. Mike Pence has to run for his life. And when I say run for his life, I'm not exaggerating.
Right.
What would that group of people have done had they gotten a hold of him? What would they have done had they gotten a hold of Nancy Pelosi, for heaven's sake? I had a friend ask me the other day, do you really think they would have harmed them? I don't have any doubt, none, that they would have harmed them. Because he's asking that question, though, because he's a staunch conservative. In his mind, there's some question about that, in part because these insurrectionists have been getting sympathy from right-wing media. You know,
they're the good guys.
They're tourists.
Yeah.
They've been called tourists.
Yeah.
They're peaceful. Or, remember, as soon as it happened, you had people saying, it's not really Trump supporters. These are Antifa. These are Black Lives Matters people that are impersonating. Anything to say, no, we're not like that. That's not our
people.
Our
side doesn't do that. Yeah.
I said on the podcast the week after that January 6th insurrection that I had told my family days before that I was concerned about that Wednesday, January the 6th date coming up. And I was concerned about potential violence. But here's why. I mean, it's not because I'm a prophet. It's just because the former president was telling his supporters he won, that the election was stolen from the American people, and he was saying that Congress could do something to fix it on January 6th. Well, that's a toxic brew, isn't it? Think about it. We won. Yeah. In their minds, it was stolen. Congress can do something to give it back. If they don't, then what are those who believe what the president is saying? What are they supposed to do? I mean, to be fair to them, in their deceived, misled minds, our country has been stolen. In fact, those very words have been used multiple times by the president. You've got to get your country back. You aren't going to have a country. So that might require a revolution. And in the minds of many, it did. And the scary part is it still does for them. I predict they won't stop. They being the cast of clowns that's been paraded before us in the last 10 months especially. They'll claim the audit was not done properly in Arizona. They're not going to stop, but will you, back to my plea. Have you seen enough now? Have we told you the truth? Have your chosen news sources told you the truth? If not, get rid of them. You know, the old thing, you lie to me once, shame on you. You lie to me twice, shame on me. Lie to me hundreds of times, about important stuff,
Yeah.
then enormous shame on me for having drank the conspiratorial Kool-Aid. Truth and vetting, here's the antidote to that. Truth and vetting your sources is the vaccine against conspiratorial thinking.
I see what you did there.
So Christian people have that. We've got a protection in the form of our principles regarding truth and regarding proof. I talked about some of that in our Proverbs series back on May the 22nd. If anybody cares, you can go back and refresh May the 22nd. And if you go back on to the May 22nd Proverbs message, then you'll get some of that. And then on August the 1st and August the 8th, 2 Sundays in a row, during our second hour, I did a little mini-series called A Wisdom Pyramid. It's based on a book by that title that I highly recommend. It's available in our resource center. So I think that we've done all that we can do for our listeners on this matter of truth and of proof and of information sources. So I am saying to you, friends, please, please, please heed what we've said. Your testimony is at stake. There's a sense in which your mental well-being is at stake. And what I mean by that is just that we're being troubled by things that needlessly. And so your mind is being assaulted. That's what I mean by that. You don't need your mind. You've got enough going on in a fallen world to concern yourself with, to have non-truths, lies being told to you, and then you get emotionally worked up about it. So your testimony is at stake, your health is at stake, your country's future is at stake.
Yeah, well said. We, as we said at the beginning, we don't care per se about politics. What we care about is what the politics or whatever the other issue is, what these various allegiances are doing to our people, meaning our congregation, those who listen to us as advisors, and to our mission as God's people. So let's turn then that. Let's turn to the issue of the late Ravi Zacharias.
Okay.
He died last year. But we see now who for 40 years had traveled the world evangelizing through his apologetics ministry, doing a really good job defending Christianity from the attacks of his opponents, very skilled at thinking on his feet and bringing rationality to bear on what the Scripture says and how it applies to how we think about various issues and reason about them, and to equip Christians like myself to do that very thing.
Right.
But in the last few years, accusations have come to the surface about sexual misconduct on his part, allegations that were denied by him and his ministry for quite a while, and so much so that he slandered the accusers. And over time, the truth, though, has come out, and his ministry has now admitted that the claims are true. And his ordaining denomination, Christian and Missionary Alliance, now called the Alliance World Fellowship, revoked his ordination posthumously in February. And Ravi Zacharias Ministries International is now just a shell. It is not what it was. And all of the good work that it's done over the years, is not able to have the kind of effect that it otherwise would.
Shame.
So what should we think about the fall of someone like Zacharias and what went on there?
Well, when something like that comes to light, everybody tries to distance themselves. So what I'm going to say may sound like that's what I'm trying to do here, because my first point is that I personally never promoted Ravi Zacharias.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. That's one reason, though we find many resources helpful, we have been and you've guided me as a mentor over the years to be very careful at promoting personalities.
That's correct.
Because we're all made of the same stuff.
That's
and
right.
We will fail. We can fail. And it's the concepts, the truths, the principles that we want to focus on. So even sometimes when we've drawn from a person or a resource, we don't make a big deal out of go follow this person.
Yes, that's right. Thank you for reinforcing that. I totally believe that, and I didn't promote Ravi over the years. Now, part of the reason is that when I hear someone, I look for signs of self-indulgence, of self-promotion, and when I see what might be evidence of that, and I have to just say, all I can know is it might be evidence of that. I don't make a conclusion on it. I certainly am not going to spread anything negative about the person just based on something like that, my perception, because it's just that. It's just my perception. A la what we're talking about with truth claims. I would never make any kind of claim like that. Never did. Never said anything negative about Ravi. But I also didn't say anything publicly positive. And it was for this reason, that I saw some things that I interpret as possible self-indulgence, self-promotion. I watched a video of him several years ago, and at the end of it, there was a tell for me where it was clear that he was inviting applause. He was reaching for it. Now, speakers know how to do this. Preachers have done it for centuries. But instead of angling for applause, it might be angling for an amen. But, with today's performance culture in our churches, now it is applause. That's often done in the church and often sought by the speakers. So those of us who speak a good bit, you know how this goes. And so those of us who speak a lot can sense that better than those who don't. But it's still, I want to underscore, it was just a sense, and therefore I just kind of pulled back on it. We had some of his books in our resource center, and I would profit from things that I read from him and so on. I never spoke against him because I could have been wrong in my assessment. I just never promoted him. But I've seen this kind of self-indulgence recently in other guys that I've really, really benefited from for decades, who are really just hanging on, honestly, in ministry far too long. What's up with that? Just hanging on far too long. Okay, let's pass the baton on. Okay, and as a result, saying some things and doing some things that are uncharacteristic for a lot of years prior. He wouldn't have said and done these kinds of, frankly, foolish things. Now, I'm not saying who, because the person that I have in mind in particular has done so much good and has done nothing immoral. Otherwise, I would speak out about it. But I'm just concerned. So rather than speaking to the Zacharias situation alone, I want to talk about, as we put in the title, media ministry in general. And one of the things I want you to note, friends, is that one of the things that media ministry folks have in common is money. That's why they're media ministries. They've generated enough money to be that. They have to continue to generate enough money to remain that. Someone is the golden goose who does that. Someone has the charismatic personality, the abilities, the giftedness to bring that in to keep that going. Well, think about that. This is the person. If something happens with that person, then what's going to happen to the media empire? So with that ability to generate the lifeblood of the media ministry comes power.
Yeah. I'll just interject here. Before the recording, we were talking about, I've been listening to this podcast, and it goes over Mark Driscoll.
Yeah.
It's kind of
There you
around
go.
Mark Driscoll's ministry. It's a podcast called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. And they had an episode this past week, actually, that was called The Bobby Knight Problem. And they've dealt with, over the course of the podcast, a lot of issues related to, you and I've talked about them as relates to kind of like typically with megachurches and frequently with parachurch organizations. So you'll have an organization that really is personality centric. It's around the leader.
Right.
And that's what this episode dealt with this week, was the Bobby Knight problem as an analogy to Mark Driscoll's situation, where the person becomes synonymous with the entity.
Yes.
And now you have to insulate the person,
Yes.
because if they're harmed, it harms the entity.
Exactly. Well, that I didn't watch that, but yes, you shared that before we recorded, and it's exactly the case. And that's a great analogy. Bobby Knight. I remember Bobby Knight at Indiana University, and he had some issues for a long time, but nobody could stand up to him because he was the face of Indiana University with their basketball program.
As a part of this podcast, they interviewed one of the main journalists, and I'm forgetting his name now, who helped to break that story and was instrumental in the process of really bringing something to change there. Yeah. And he talked about in hindsight, as he was going through it, he thought, why can't people see this? You know, the president of the university and various people.
Right.
And as he looks back now, he says, they saw it.
Yes,
They were,
exactly.
they were trying to keep me away from it.
There you go. They did see it.
Yeah.
But they did calculate it the way I'm talking about. You know, if we slay the golden goose, what happens here? And so that means power. And it means that you have no one, or very often no one, who's willing to challenge that person. And here's the reasoning: for the good of the ministry.
Right.
If they go, the ministry goes. So therefore, we can't do this. So there's a lot of money that sloshes around in these media ministries, which accrues a lot of power, which makes that person very often untouchable. I would encourage you, friends, if you're somebody who is enamored with some TV preacher, some media preacher, even very, very good ones. I mentioned that there's some good ones that I've benefited from. Just take whatever name you think is the best preacher on the radio, and then Google that name and IRS 990, okay? You know, that's a thing that nonprofit organizations are supposed
People
to
are
fill
now
out.
Googling Ken Brown 990, Larry Castle 990.
Well, these programs, you know, Ravi Zacharias Ministries International, that would be a nonprofit organization that would be required to fill out these 990s, right? And so you get to see, it's public information, how much money is going through there and even how much money they pay their officers. And I will just tell you, you do that, and you do it even with the people that you consider the best, and you will probably be shocked, as I was, and dismayed. Honestly, I was dismayed. I'll tell you this: you will, I hope, come away with the conclusion they don't need my money. You know, you're sending money to them. I would say, why would you send money away to a media ministry, any media ministry? But some of you are doing that, and I'm encouraging you, discouraging that. And even very good people. I think of a kind of newcomer to the scene, a guy named Costi Hinn, who we both admire very much because here's a guy who's a nephew of Benny Hinn, I think.
Nephew, yeah. As a younger man, worked in his ministry as security and other things.
But has done a great service to the body of Christ by exposing what is going on behind the scenes there. And he's really got good theology and seems to be a very good man, and I'm very thankful for him. So he's a newcomer to this, but he's starting a parachurch ministry. I just saw, it was today or yesterday, that he's starting something called For the Gospel.
Yeah, that's actually been going, at least the blog part of it's been going.
Okay.
It's been a blog for a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, because what I saw in the last day or two was something about we've trademarked this, we're going kind of branding it.
So maybe it's becoming an official thing,
Something.
whereas before it was just a blog and
Maybe.
I get the newsletter by that name.
Okay. You know, so, but he's a great guy, and I hope he remains a great guy until Jesus returns or takes him home. But he seems genuine, with a genuine concern for the gospel. But here's the thing. We don't need Costi biblically. In terms of the Lord's work and how the Lord's work gets done, I just want to make this pitch to you all. You don't need any of the media ministry people, none of them. Now, what you do need is your church. Because that's God's vehicle to carry out his work. That's what's indispensable. Now, these other things, I am thankful for people who write good books. I read them. I benefit from them, right? And if I can watch a podcast, if I can listen to a sermon, if I can and benefit from that, well, wonderful. And I thank the Lord for that. But in terms of sending money to prop that up as if it's somehow indispensable, it is anything but. It is not. And evangelicalism, over the years, has developed a kind of unofficial college of cardinals. You know what I mean by that? You know, the Roman Catholic Church has its hierarchy.
Right.
And that includes, of course, the Pope at the top, but then underneath that, you got they call it the College of Cardinals. And they will meet periodically. They'll be summoned to Rome to talk about some issue that's arisen, and the Pope will preside, and then they will confer about it and come to a decision. Well, in evangelicalism, you don't have that. You don't have that kind of hierarchy, but we've developed this sort of unofficial College of Cardinals so that when an issue arises, we look to them to tell us what we should do. We look to them, honestly, very often more than our own pastors. Our pastors would love to be them if they had the gifting and they had the opportunity, obviously, right? I'm being facetious a bit, but I think that's what a lot of our people think.
Yeah.
Well, of course I would look to them rather than the pastor of my church, because the pastor of my church wishes he was them. And if he was able to pull it off, he would be them. That's what he would be pursuing. I think that's the assumption, that this is all the cream that rose to the top. And, if we had a long time, I would just tell you that's not the deal. I'm not saying I could do what all these men are doing. I'm not claiming that. I am claiming that it wasn't just a natural process of cream rising to the top. These are folks who pursued this. These are folks who marketed this. These are folks who wanted this. And if you have people who know how to market, then that can be done, okay? So lose that idea.
Would you agree with me, too, to say that the best among that group, if you were to listen to counsel that they offer publicly for peers, are the pastors among them?
Yes.
And it's because what they're doing, maybe they've got folks on their team that have become good at marketing the things but they're things that they've done start off as doing for their church.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So like people whose books are produced as collections of their sermons, basically.
Right, that's often what happens.
That's usually the best stuff.
I agree with that, yep. So we have groups in evangelicalism like the Gospel Coalition that just has all kinds of good blogs that are put out, and they do book reviews and a lot of helpful stuff. But when an issue comes up, what we want to know is, what does D.A. Carson think about this? Or what does Tim Keller think about this? What do the people who head up the Gospel Coalition, think about it? Or going back a long way, I said in a sermon a few weeks ago that there was this document in '92 called Evangelicals and Catholics Together. And some evangelicals signed that along with some Roman Catholics to try to have a meeting of the minds. But evangelicals out in the evangelical world were saying, what do we do with this? Should we support this? We've got Bill Bright signing it, who's with the Lord now, but he was the head of Campus Crusade for Christ, and J.I. Packer signed it, and some very good people. So Charles Colson, should I be in favor of this? And so the College of Cardinals had to get together. And that included a bunch of guys like R.C. Sproul, good guys, R.C. Sproul, John MacArthur, and others. They met to, in effect, tell us what we should think about evangelicals and Catholics together. I remember Sproul, I can still remember Sproul saying after they had their meeting, he said, this is a quote, "We dodged a bullet. We dodged a bullet." So we were able to come, the cavalry was able to come, get together, and help the evangelical world, dodge this bullet. There are no College of Cardinals. There are no more apostles. So don't treat people that way. Benefit from those people. But do it on a kind of ad hoc basis. Ad hoc meaning, okay, you got a book that's a topic that I'm interested in. I need some help with. Let me buy your book. Let me, but do it that way, and then remember where the action really is biblically. It's in your church and the multiplication of churches that it happens. Do it on an ad hoc basis, not a fanboy or a fangirl kind of basis.
Yeah. And then to balance what I was saying earlier, what you said here, it's not that the leadership of local churches is infallible either. There are no. It's not that there couldn't be issues. It's not just that all the issues reside only in big media ministries.
Yes.
There can be problems in a local church too.
That's right. And some of the people you mentioned, and I alluded to, are actually pastors of churches. Mark Driscoll was a pastor of Mars Hill in Seattle. So what do you do with that? Well, here's what you do with it. Make sure as a pastor, if you're a pastor, and then make sure as a church member that you're helping your pastor not to become bigger than your church. If you're about pastoring a church, don't become bigger than your church. Because when you become bigger than your church, now the processes, the biblical processes that God has given to the church now don't work. That's what happened to a Mark Driscoll.
Yeah.
He's in a church. God's given to the church discipline accountability process, including for leaders, 1 Timothy chapter 5. That if you have 2 or 3 witnesses against their sin, then those who sin rebuke publicly that others may fear, the Bible says. God's given us a process for the local church. The problem is when the pastor becomes bigger than the church.
Right.
So as a pastor, don't seek to be bigger than your church. And as a church member or as a lay leader that's come alongside, a leader, lay or otherwise, that's come alongside your pastor, don't allow them, for their own sake and for the sake of the church, to become bigger than the church. So one difference is the local church has been given by God a process that parachurch ministries have not been given to handle these things. But if your pastor, who's in a local church, becomes bigger than that, then all of a sudden it's negated anyway. The leaders have in churches should then be kept from becoming too big to fail. And that's what we were describing earlier. Ravi's too big to fail. These guys are the golden goose. So therefore, if they fail, everything fails. And the other advantage to a local church is that when, not if, pastors fail, of course they do in a fallen world, but when pastors fail, the impact is minimized because the audience is minimized. Now, it's enormous to that dear flock, but it doesn't affect all of evangelicalism. It doesn't affect the reputation of Christ internationally, because a local church had a sin problem, and then that local church, by God's grace, will deal with that. So for all of those reasons, we could list more. Focus on the local church.
Yeah, great. Amen. Were you working to solicit an amen right there? It worked.
Good deal.
Well, great dealing with this topic. Thank you at home for watching with us. And as we do each week, I encourage you, subscribe to our YouTube channel, click on that notification bell so you know when new episodes come out. We produce these every week on Saturdays, come out at 2 p.m., and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one. If you have a question you'd like us to consider, you can send that in to our email address, info@cbctrenton.com, or text it to us at 97000.